everyone. Thank you guys for being here. Thank everyone who has given a talk. I loved all the talk. And thank you to the IET and the Applied Ethics Center, and especially Alec for organizing this event and putting it together. As the title of my talk suggests, I'm going to be speaking today about LLMs, justification, and the future of work. And while I will do my best to keep matters of technical epistemology in the background and considerations about the future of work in the foreground, I hope you can make your patience, as at times I will need to consider epistemological issues directly in order to draw my concern about LLMs and the future of work. LLMs, and in particular LLMs using the GPT architecture, have, at the risk of understating the matter, created something of a splash recently. I'd like to highlight this at the outset. This new generation of LLMs have produced incredible results in natural language processing tasks. The goal of this talk is not to cast aspersions on the efficacy of LLMs. Rather, it is to clarify under what circumstances we are justified in forming beliefs on the basis of their outcomes. And though there is not time here to draw out the connection, as goes justified belief, so goes justified decision-making, at least in the sense we're concerned with here. A small terminological note, throughout the talk I'm going to be referring to outputs, which I just take in the semi-technical sense to mean sentences produced by GPTs that look like assertions. So as you can use that word, that's my point. Okay. So I would give it to you all that our grounds for forming justified beliefs on the basis of outputs are different than our grounds for forming justified beliefs on the basis of assertions made by agents. Furthermore, I hope to convince you all that this distinction between outputs on the one hand and assertions on the other is crucial as we enter a world in which LLMs and related technologies are increasingly used to assist in and make decisions. The kinds of decisions LLMs will make in the future will not be limited to what items we pack for a day trip to the beach or which hotel to stay at as we visit a new city. LLMs and related technologies will inform decision-making in fields that have significant and tangible impacts on individuals and societies, fields like business, law, medicine, and politics. As such, we must take the time now, at this early stage in technology's adoption, to clarify our understanding of whether, when, and why we are justified in forming beliefs on the basis of the outputs of LLMs. As I will argue, we are justified under different conditions than in the case of assertions made by agents. Okay, so here's my first major claim. Despite appearances, LLMs are not capable of making genuine assertions. This may seem a little surprising at first glance. After all, anyone who has used ChatGPT will tell you that the system is capable of producing assertions, questions, sonnets, and a lot more. Not to mention all of the imagery that is being integrated into these models right now. Nevertheless, appearances are deceiving. There are, to my mind, at least 4 reasons why we are inclined to mistakenly think that LLMs are capable of genuine assertions. First, LLMs produce text that takes the linguistic form of an assertion. That's pretty straightforward. Second, they can produce sentences that take the form of assertions in the context of conversations, natural language context outside of just atomic sentences. Third, LLMs appear capable of justifying their assertions. You can prompt an LLM for reasoning as to why it gave the output it did, and we'll talk more about that shortly. And finally, LLMs produce true sentences reliably. That may raise some eyebrows. If it does, imagine an ideal case where you could produce an LLM that was reliable in some topic domain. I don't see any reason to think that's not possible, but we can leave that aside for now. Despite the surface level similarities, though, outputs cannot be genuine assertions. True assertions have at least 2 essential features. There may be more. There may be linguistic considerations, speech acts considerations. But I want to just suggest that first, assertions express a proposition, and second, they express that the agent responsible for the assertion held some doxastic attitude towards the proposition. And that may be a little technical, so let me make the point at the same time. Imagine the following. You're walking along a beach collecting shells or some such, and you stumble across an arrangement of pebbles that inexplicably and unambiguously spells out a sentence. This beach was named in 1914. Ought we consider the arrangement of pebbles on the beach to be an assertion? The answer is clearly no. Furthermore, the reason for denying that a sentence is an assertion is intuitively clear. While S has the right linguistic form, there's nothing being asserted nor anyone to do the asserting. S is simply the product of random chance. To put the intuition differently, a linguistic form is not by itself sufficient to qualify something as an assertion. Assertions satisfy at least one other necessary condition. In addition to expressing the propositions, an assertion expresses that the agent responsible for it believes that proposition. This distinction is all well and good, but one might wonder what it tells us about relying on LLMs for decision making, and specifically in the context of the future of work. To answer this question, consider under what circumstances we are justified in forming beliefs on the basis of genuine assertions. This is my blurry office photo for you all. So imagine someone approaches you in the halls of UMass Boston and alarmingly tells you that there's been a murder downstairs. I will suggest, as indeed the literature on the topic suggests, that in such cases you are justified in believing what you've been told, provided you don't have a reason, referred to as a defeater in the literature, for thinking that what you've been told is false or that the person who said it was unjustified. In other words, if you have no stronger reason to not believe what you've been told, you're allowed to just take what you're told at face value. But the situation is quite different for LLMs, because the outputs of LLMs, these assertion-like sentences, do not express a belief. They do not and cannot be the subjects of epistemic properties like justification. To put the matter less technically, the outputs of LLMs are neither justified nor unjustified. But wait, you ask, surely there's been a mistake. If these systems are not justified in their outputs, how can they be such useful tools? After all, an LLM can tell me how much flour I need to make a pie, what the capital of the United States is, and much, much more. Here then is my second claim for the afternoon. LLMs are useful because they are reliable tools for tracking truth across natural language contexts. In the sense of justification, in the epistemic sense, LLMs are equivalent to thermometers. Let's take another example to make this point clearer. Consider under what circumstances you are justified in forming beliefs on the basis of a thermometer. If I see my thermometer read 72 degrees, then under normal circumstances, I'll be justified in forming the belief it is 72 degrees outside. Pretty straightforward. What underlies my justification is first, my general belief that thermometers are reliable when it comes to tracking temperature. And second, the fact that I possess no stronger reason to doubt that it is 72 degrees outside. Like the knowledge that the thermometer is broken, for example. Thermometers reliably track truth with regard to temperature. And our awareness of this reliable truth tracking is what justifies our beliefs about temperature formed on the basis of this evidence. So too with LLMs. Because the outputs of LLMs do not express beliefs and cannot therefore express justified or unjustified states, we can only form justified beliefs on the basis of their outputs insofar as we have justified beliefs about their reliability in some given topic domain. And stronger reason, and lack stronger reason to think the output is false. So again, beliefs about reliability, no stronger reason for doubting the output. Exactly the same circumstances under which we are justified in forming beliefs on the basis of the thermometer. Now, I think, and I heard last night, the most salient counter-argument I encounter at this point is that LLMs are no different than people in this regard. One might argue that I'm only justified in forming beliefs based on an assertion insofar as I have justified beliefs about the reliability of the person in question. But it's crucial to note, as I've noted before, that our grounds for justification are distinct in each case. I do not need any beliefs about the reliability of my interlocutor to be justified provisionally in believing what they've said to me, provided I possess no stronger reason for doubting them. This is because I can assume that they are expressing a justified belief. I may find out later that they're not justified, or that their belief is false. But this is immaterial. What is key is that because the LLM expresses no belief, and therefore produces nothing that can be justified or unjustified, There is no basis upon which to acquire prima facie justification from an LLM, absent beliefs about its reliability. Key thing about this is you do not get justification from assertions by believing things about your interlocutor. You don't need to think anything specific or general about their reliability in order to be justified in taking them at their word. Okay, I think I bored you to tears with technical considerations. So let me just take stock of the commitments, and then we'll turn back to the question of the future of work. Namely, how can this insight about the epistemic status of LLMs prepare us for a future of work in which LLMs will be integral to decision-making? First, the commitment. So far, I've claimed that the outputs of LLMs cannot be assertions because they fail to express a doxastic state, i.e. a belief. And as such, they can either be justified or unjustified, only reliable or unreliable, as the case may be. This is to be contrasted with genuine assertions made by agents. In the case of genuine assertions, we gain prima facie or defeasible justification for believing what has been asserted to us. Okay. I see at least two significant ways in which considerations about the epistemic status of LLMs bears directly on the topic of the future of work. And these are accountability and optimization priorities. So let's consider accountability first. In the future, LLMs and related technologies will be used extensively in decision making. This seems fairly certain, unless we make a real big about face on these technologies real fast. And specifically, they'll be used to make decisions that affect individuals, groups, and even societies. And so we should have an account of whether or not an LLM can be blamed or held accountable for giving you a poorly reasoned suggestion. As a kind of toy case of this, imagine that judges are handing out sentences based on the recommendations of an LLM. And my understanding is that some of this goes on already in sentencing, not with LLMs, but with other kinds of technologies, though I'm not up to date on that. Let's say this particular LLM recommends sentences of 30 years for misdemeanors on a regular basis. If the judge delivers those sentences, it seems like a legitimate question to ask who or what is to blame for the unfair recommendation or decision. The judge may attempt to point blame at the LLM for the unfair sentencing. After all, the judge received some kind of bad output, maybe even an unjustified output, someone might say. But as I've argued this afternoon, such an accusation would be nonsensical. We can only fault the LLM in the sense that we might fault a broken or unreliable thermometer. The LLM, despite any outputs that it might give to explain its recommendation, is incapable of being justified or unjustified, and is therefore incapable of being a subject of blame, at least in this relevant epistemic sense. I don't have time to get into it today, but that epistemic sense of blame ties very closely to our practical notions, so I'm happy to answer questions. So instead, I want to say that if, for instance, this judge delivered unfair sentences on the basis of an LLM, we can only blame either the judge themselves for having unjustified beliefs about the reliability of the LLM, or whichever agents were responsible for misrepresenting the reliability of the LLM. To put the matter differently, when it comes to evaluating blame along this dimension, epistemic blame specifically, it's agents all the way down. We cannot point back at an LLM and accuse it of faulty reasoning any more than we can blame an unreliable thermometer for the decision to wear a parka in 90-degree heat. The second way in which the epistemic status of LLMs bears in the future of work is along the lines of resource allocation, development, and optimization. I've suggested one account of the epistemic status of LLMs to you here today. Let's call that the non-doxastic theory. Another account might claim that LLMs are in fact capable of justification, and that their explanations of their reasoning are proof of this. We can call this the doxastic theory. If the doxastic theory is correct, i.e. the view that LLMs are capable of justification, then in order to make LLMs better, safer along one dimension, and more useful, we might want to consider prioritizing designing and building models that give very detailed responses when we ask them why they said the things that they said. After all, if LLMs are capable of justification and not just reliability, then part of improving LLMs should be to improve these responses in particular. But if instead you think, as I think, that the non-doxastic account is true, then our priority should be to increase the reliability of LLMs, to increase the responsibility on companies to demonstrate and accurately represent their reliability and the reliability of related technologies. And finally, to ensure that end users are informed about the reliability of LLMs and are responsible for the irresponsible use of these systems for decision making. So where does that leave us? In the years to come, LLMs are likely to become an integral part of decision making, both at the individual, the corporate, and societal level. At the risk of belaboring the point, this reliance on LLMs will not be limited to enterprises of laypersons. We will use their outputs to direct research, inform policy, deliver legal evaluations, approve loans, diagnose disease, and much, much more. Understanding the epistemic status of LLMs is not simply an abstract question. It is a question that informs how we use LLMs to assist in and make decisions, what responsibilities we see companies and end users as having, and how accountability for harms produced by LLMs should be understood. Thank you.
Thanks, Alec, and thank you very much, Professor Askowitz, for the invitation and for giving me this opportunity to share my work. And a big thank you to my advisors, Professor David Levy and Professor Warren Scully, who are here today as well. And thank you so much for all the attendees for taking the time to be here today. So, turning to my talk on gaming the game, here I'm going to denote workplace games and the gamification played at online work and how those workers experience those games on these online global labor markets. And I'll be presenting the latest version of my working paper that's leading to my dissertation. So, my focus in this study is online global labor markets, where the workers who physically reside in any part of the globe can trade their skill set and deliver services on a cloud-based platform. And these are, in contrast to these Uber and food delivery-like platforms, these platforms are globally dispersed and connects the global demand and supply of labor. And all services are delivered within the platform itself. And all interactions are virtual on this platform space. And my focus here is relatively high-skilled work where, like more creativity, conceptual thinking, and expertise is involved, where we call this knowledge work like, software development, and even data entry, and even business consultancy. So, interestingly, the buyers for these services are not only the individuals, but also there are increasingly business companies who are outsourcing work onto these platforms. And another important point to note about these platforms are the workers who are working on those platforms have to apply for their jobs and bid for their work, and also they have to set their own prices for that work. So basically it's a globally competitive, auction-based marketplace for these knowledge services. So moving on to gamification, in this study I examine how these workers understand and experience their online work environment in two aspects. First, I consider the gamified work practices gamified by platform organizations and implemented by them. And also consider, on the second aspect, whether and how these workers craft workarounds around these gamified work practices. And moving on to this gamification, it's generally understood as using these video game techniques like, digital currencies, scoring and ratings, like techniques on the non-video game spaces at work. So gamification is supposedly used to improve this motivation and to make this work fun and enjoyable. But we don't know yet if that work being gamified on these labor platforms are that so fun and exciting for these workers on these global labor markets. So here we understand gamification as purposefully designed gamified work by the platform organizations, and also how this platform the architecture is designed gamifiedly, and how these players understand these gamified work practices and how they enact that in their everyday work practices. So, moving on to the workplace game, so these are the worker-generated games at the grassroots level. So Michael Baraba's work on similar work on workplace games and manufacturing of consent, examining how the work was organized under capitalism, not just for the efficiency but also for controls. So later that work led to a whole stream of research on the process as well. He understood games crafted by these workers as a political mechanism that generate consent to work through a piece rate game called Making Out, which he called Making Out Against Management. So these are the ways that workers were making out against management in the effective flows in the Chicago plant that he studied, and when they were trying to achieve their daily targets and trying to achieve their daily bonuses. So it's important to note that in these workplace games, the consensus on the rules of the games were crafted within the collective of workers, and their social interaction were central in these games. And we found that the workplace games on the Chicago plant ultimately led these workers to engage in more work, and while they were thinking that they were actually playing against managerial purposes. So that said, when considering both these games, like gamified practices and the workplace games, workspace games, we still only know very little about how these games are played at the online global markets and what sort of consequences this produce for these knowledge workers on these type of markets. So, with that, what struck me most about these global markets was workers are appearing to be so into these platforms despite so much whining. So, even in the context of this fragile and temporary, sorry for confusion. Even in the fragile and temporary work, so they are appearing to be so much invested in these platforms, even though they complain so much. So moving beyond these obvious economic reasons to keep on working, so I asked the motivational big question for me as why these workers keep on working despite their complaining so much. So in this study, I asked the question, what role the gamification and the workplace games play in online labor markets and how these workers really experience these games. And with that, I also looked at how to gamify work practices, generate consent and dissent to work, and how do consent and dissent intertwine with these labor platforms, and what consequences does this dual engagement generate for workers. So with that, I studied the largest online labor market for these knowledge services, where 30% of Fortune 500 companies, 100 companies, outsource their services onto these platforms, specifically for this platform. And there are 18 million freelancers registered and 5 million clients on this platform. So, and it spans across 180 countries. And basically, the customers for this platform is the individuals who trade their skill set, and also the buyers, the clients who are individual and business companies who are outsourcing these services from these workers. And they basically charge a percentage fee for each transaction that's done on this platform. So, and as I mentioned earlier, the bidding system is central for these type of platforms. And with that, this is how I conducted my study. So I conducted 20 semi-structured interviews with the workers, and I posted a job interview post on the platform itself to get them recruited for the interviews for pay. And one of the key components of my data is the archival data from the discussion forums. So the discussion forum is a space where workers can share their ideas, complaints, and even the questions within the virtual space on the platform itself. So, you know subreddit, right? So yeah, this is the discussion forum is similar space like that. So, and also I did participant observations as a registered user, as a client and worker on the platform for 2 years. And that really gave me a rich experience and immersed experience to how to navigate these gamified work practices on the platform. And the data analysis technique I used here was the thematic analysis, and I used NVivo as a tool. So with that, let's move on to this game sold on the platform which I'm looking at. So the game element I'm studying here is the digital currency called tokens. So tokens are a digital wallet on these platforms, and these are only for the workers. So they're supposed to use the tokens to bid and apply for the jobs, as I mentioned earlier. So each job applied needs a certain number of tokens that's being decided by a platform algorithm. And extra tokens can be used to gain more visibility on the proposals that's being sent out for these job postings. And that extra tokens to be spent on boosting the proposals, which I'm going to talk in a minute, is an option by design. And a small number of tokens usually come for free for these workers, depending on what sort of a membership profile that they have on the platform. And the rest of the tokens have to be purchased in bundles by them. So the main two gamified work practices where these tokens are used are bidding and the boosting that I'm looking here in the interest of time. So in bidding, the workers have to set their rates for each job when sending out the proposals, and bidding is a compulsory work practice on the platform to find jobs, and it's a must to spend tokens on these bidding practices. And once the workers send out the proposals with the bid rates, there is a separate gamified work practice called boosting. So in the boosting, extra tokens can be spent to gain more visibility. And when boosted, the purpose is the client's, the worker's job proposal kind of appear at the top of the proposal list in the client's interface. And so like when the client actually gives the job application set. So this is portrayed as optional by design. And as you can see in the picture, I'm not sure if that is so clear. So there is a real-time update on this boosting happening on the marketplace. So the workers, as you can see in the picture, the workers can see like what are the bids happening on the marketplace at a given point of time and what number of tokens are being spent by the other workers. So workers can boost until the auction closes for this job. And this picture is always getting updated in fractions of seconds. Like as you can see, the live proposals is updated like 16 seconds ago before the screenshot was taken. So although the platform claims the tokens were introduced to weed out the fake profiles in the platforms, in the help pages they also like portray these tokens as a mechanism to gain visibility for their job proposals. And also it's like in the help pages, the platform says it signals that the worker is so much serious and invested in the job when they are spending extra tokens. So with all those token spending, actually what the workers are striving for is to win a job on the marketplace, and that is also a gamified label that's being used on the platform. So with that, turning to the workaround games in the game zone, this is how the workers game the game. So like, like trying to find the workarounds around these gamified work practices. So in the interest of time here, I only talk about two main workarounds. First, they set lower bids when they are applying and sending the proposals. And this is to get more gigs and to get hired, obviously setting the cheaper prices. So especially that happens when they are like newbies and trying to establish on the platform. And but the workers are very well aware that when they are setting those low bids, they are aware that they are setting it at their cost sometimes, but they do it to get established on the platform. So on the other end, the game is workaround game is on boosting. So some would set extremely high bids when they are boosting to get the highest, thinking like it's very unlikely others would reach that token amount in the very first place. So because like once a worker send a boost with a certain number of tokens that can be changed on the platform, so they kind of set the most highest extreme value boosting, thinking that it's kind of unreachable for the rest of the rivals. So it's also interesting the fact that these games against the gamified practices are being played individually and crafted individualized set of rules, unlike in the socially agreed set of rules in the workplace games. So with that, moving on, before moving on to my findings, so here's a roadmap for my findings, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. So I have 5 types of voices in my data. So the platform organization have their voice on the support articles, and these are kind of the help pages where they describe these platform features and the FAQs type things. And also I have data on the voice of of forum moderators, where like the actual workers who are in the platform who moderate the discussion forums. And there are three types of worker voices: workers who complain and workers who are okay with the game, like it is what it is with the design. And also there are a set of workers who are supporting gamified practices. So this set of workers are in gray because the other workers are very skeptical about them, thinking that there is some kind of platform implanted advocates, because they always chime in the conversations against the complaints and put counter arguments against those. So they're very like speculative that these are like company employees. With that, moving on to my key findings and discussion. So this is a quote from the support article where the platform says, "Freelancing is your business, and like any business owner, you have to make investments to sell your products and services." And it goes on saying as the token spending is an investment for the freelancing career. So as I mentioned, the support articles represent the company propaganda where like the tokens are presented as business investment for these independent workers. And because like these are not considered employees of the platforms, obviously, as if they are the gig economy platforms. So these are independent contractors, and the platform themselves claim as only as intermediaries. So even the moderators legitimize the same rhetoric, and they reiterate the same thing on the discussion forums as well, like prefiguring it as a, like an investment for these independent contractors. And so, moving on to this worker dissent against the gamified practices. So once the freelancers goes on saying, boosted system is horrible, and the same freelancer goes on saying that it's kind of just nuts to see that it's kind of feel like we are dogs in a gladiator arena fighting for the scraps now. So at the very end of the quote, so now I spend at least $20 to $25 a week on sending the proposals, but get less work and less responses, totally frustrated. So unlike in Bravo's workplace games, so the workers get to, where these workers get too invested psychologically in playing the game itself, these workers are well aware of the fact that they are playing a game and they are like actually making money for the organizations. So they're just disappointed about like how it's extremely competitive on the marketplace, and also like obviously about the cost that they're spending on these token digital currencies, and they're frustrated about the ability to afford these tokens are kind of sometimes outperforming their skill set and the experience on the platform. So as it's in the code. So, and they goes on complaining as shame on your platform and your token system. How dare you involve people to this extent? So disappointed. So, but the interesting fact here, I think, is despite so much complaining against these gamified work practices, workers keep on working and they're keeping on playing these games. So partly because they experience like it like a gamble game, because what I was saying, in all seriousness, using the tokens to bid on jobs here is no different than a casino game. So they experience it as a casino game where like workers also get personal pride in their rare big wins, where like in this sense like getting hired or landing on an actual job. So while they're complaining on one end, workers also keep on playing those games expecting these successful hires on the platform. As I said, I'm experiencing it as a gamble. Another reason to keep on working here is the seductive game. I conceptualize in two ways. The seductive transparency is where the visual transparency in the platform user interface, showing them the actual boosting that's going on in fractions of seconds, as I showed in the picture earlier and here as well. So, and also the another aspect of this transparency is the rule of the game is also explicit, where they describe these gamified work practices in their support articles and stuff. So transparency itself really seduces these workers to play these games on the platform and even the workarounds. So the other aspect of the seductive game is the seductive opacity, where like the other end where the workers are wondering like what's really going on this boosting and the gamified practices. So they don't know really what would be the return on investment for these tokens spent on the platform. And sometimes there's no guarantee that the client would actually see their proposal at the top of the list. And there's no guarantee even the client would be prioritizing the fact that who's appearing on the top of the list when they're recruiting. So the opaqueness of the algorithm, which is underlying these gamified practices, is obviously ambiguous to these workers, and also they're ambiguous about the exact outcomes, whether it's going to take them a good hire or not, and also they're also not knowing the fact that what would be their outcomes if they don't play the games at all is also setting them for the fear of missing out sometimes. So all those ambiguities and the fear of missing out and the seductive transparency compel these workers to comply with the rules of the games most of the times. With that, there is also a re-engineering of dissent and the complaints that's happening on those forums. So a worker's voice against a platform is what you don't seem to understand is that platform is not a charity. And it goes on saying if they are asking the platform to go bankrupt. So these are the forums where workers express their complaints, but also these forums act as a water cooler where people come in and then they express their dissent and then kind of a counter argument happens. And sometimes they open up conversation threads to asking questions, they have to close it out even without answers, proper answers for their questions. So these sort of responses re-engineer the design where the workers come and express their complaints. And also here's another code where it shows how a counter argument against a freelancer is posted on the platform conversation threads. So it says that I hope you continue to be incredibly fortunate in your life that paying for tokens is the most dramatic hardship that you can imagine. So this is how the counter arguments happen from the workers themselves on these discussion forums. So at the end of the day, on the forum, sometimes people feel they are the problem for not trying harder and harder for these to be a successful independent contractor on these forums. So because it's always kind of counteractive arguments that's happening on these conversation threads. So with that, turning on to my research question again. So why do workers keep on working like the willing whiners on those platforms? So I think it's an ongoing puzzle to me that I'm trying to find answers, but I believe that some of the data that I just discussed here in a nutshell gives some explanations for the big question and the role of the gamified practices that's being played in it. So with that, I see the key contributions in this study as where the consent is not getting deeply and out of pure willingness that is being manufactured on those platforms, but it's kind of contingent acquiescence where it's intertwined with the dissent. So that's kind of a difference that I'm seeing with the workplace games where they actually purely out of pure willingness they play the games, and here it's more of a reluctant consent where it's intertwined with the dissent. So, and even in both gamification and the workplace games, it's the game itself, playing the game itself is supposed to increase their motivation, and it was so fun and exciting for these workers. But in this online labor market, the game and the playing of it is not so much fun and exciting as you also sometimes with these complaints that people are posting on the conversation forums. But despite this dissent, the interesting fact is they keep on playing it for the reasons some of the reasons I already discussed here. So it's important to note that in workplace games, even though workers knew that workers were playing a game, and they were not aware about the fact that they were actually playing against themselves in the workplace games. So, but on these workspace games, workers are more aware of the fact that sometimes the play of the game is at their own cost, especially when it comes to their token spending. So against the gamified work practice is again re-engineered subtly towards engaging in these gamified work practices more and more with the subtle compliance. So with that, another key argument here is when the gamification and the workaround games are played on those online labor markets, the workers are intensifyingly engaging in this platform, so committed to this platform organization and through a self-investment in the platform itself. And it's kind of enmeshing these workers in an investment mix in the sense of trying to figure out the platform architecture itself and to navigate these gamified work practices, trying to be in the maze of being a winner and an independent contractor, successful independent contractor. So it's like the more they play the game, the more they get invested in the game itself, but not only in the game and the play itself, but also in these platform organizations, because there's a self-investment happening in terms of the monetary investment, obviously the token spending, and also the non-monetary investment when it comes to learning the game itself is a skill on the platform itself, and even the technical ability to navigate this platform work practices are a skill set for them. But interestingly, this self-investment is an ongoing thing because even as we speak, the new technologies might be introduced to the platform as new features. So it might be an ongoing learning process where workers have to go back to the learning curve again. So the contributions that I'm potentially trying to make here is extending this long-standing research on the manufacturing consent in workplaces into a new setting of workspaces on those global labor markets where the contracts are fragile and remote. And I bring into new concepts here called seductive transparency and seductive opacity. And there's potential in advancing our understanding on the role of gamification that's being played on those platforms. And also, I believe it contributes to the broader on-demand economy by understanding these power asymmetries and also the role of technology on these global online labor markets, and also bringing in these knowledge workers' voices into the bigger picture. So with that, I think the role of gamification and the workspace games is in these online labor market is an ongoing question, yet a significant one, I believe, because given this emerging role of platform technologies and their massive implications on the future of work. So thank you very much.
Okay. Questions? I'm not surprised that you're one of the people.
No, I just guess I have a comment for Hiranya. When you referenced Burley, I was reminded by the studies that were done by Canadian sociologist Irvin Goffman, the concept in asylums, and he referred to these sort of petty resistance strategies, which rather than undermining the structure of work, what they end up doing is kind of giving it becomes a coping strategy, right? Sort of you explain to yourself that you're actually resisting, but in the process of doing that, you reproduce the very structure you're supposed to resist. So I'm curious if this is relevant, although the people being studied are different, to some of the things that you've studied so far, if you're familiar with Goffman's studies. Maybe it influenced Burley or
Yeah, thank you. I hope you all can hear me. So thank you very much for that comment. And so I'm drawing on Monica Bravo and the workplace games, but not I'm not coming from sociology background itself. So, but I'm familiar with the Irving Goffman's point that you made. So yeah, but I have not studied that in depth. But I think the relevance that I'm seeing about the workplace games here is these are similarly the games that's being crafted by the workers on the platform are also workplace games which are crafted at the grassroots level of these platforms. So that's the difference that I'm trying to see when it's compared to the gamified systems by the platform design itself, I guess. So, and I think like, for the reasons that I already mentioned, like all the interactions being virtual and there are no like social interactions as in person happening on those platforms. I think like that's why I'm trying to conceptualize as a workspace games when it comes to these worker-generated games on the platform itself. But I also think like the structure component of it is already like there in the platform architecture. And of course there are like their own set of structures that I mentioned, like the ways that they find to work around these systems, which is again like very fragmented and atomized on those platforms where like this is like very individual games. So that's sort of the differences that I'm seeing drawing on from the Bravo's case study. But yeah, so that's a really interesting point. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I have a question for Jake. It's really about reliability. That's actually a couple of different questions. So, when we're usually gauging instruments as truth trackers, we want to look at their outputs and match them to what we think is the truth, but we also want to look at the mechanism that generates that, right? Both of those are components of the reliability tracker, right? So knowing how your thermometer is working is actually part of whether you take it to be a reliable thermometer. Of course, one of the notable things about LLMs is they're black boxes, right? So the mechanism inside is basically totally opaque to us, so we're out of luck with that part of it. So there's that component. And the other component is that a lot of usage for the big data models, you mentioned judging. Usually that's not the judging. I think it's usually in doing bail, parole, thank you, I'm just spacing out. Doing parole calculations, you're doing risk calculations. And there's really a very difficult thing of linking up risk calculations with truth tracking. Part of the problem is you don't know what would be the truth. You know, you're basically in parole calculations, you're trying to figure out whether this is going to be a repeat offender, or how likely they are to end up back in jail, how likely they are to impact their community. And there's no sort of independent truth about that can be used as in that same way that we think about sort of reliable truth tracking the temperature or something like that. So I guess there's two different things I'm very worried about the move. One is that the mechanism is opaque, and that's part of our assessment of reliability, and the other is the kinds of decision making we're trying to do. It's complex calculations of risk, which also have trouble with the notion of truth tracking. So I'm just curious about how you're thinking about that stuff.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So let me take the first part first. So I think we need to make a distinction between what maybe foundationally justifies us about the reliability of the mechanism versus what you as an agent justifiably believe about the mechanism. So there are many, many tools for which I have little to no understanding about how they work. I kind of just assume that they do. And I assume that because they do the things that I want them to do and they seem to work pretty good, and that's about it. Now, I mean, to take your concern seriously though, we assume that at some level down the chain, someone's got to know about how the mechanism tracks the fact of the world. And the picture of how you spell out how that gets conferred is tricky. And maybe one way to think about it, for my purposes at least, is just to say, you don't really need to know those things in order to be justified in believing the thermometer. A child with no understanding of the thermometer can be justified in forming beliefs on its basis. And that is because they have some kind of justified pragmatic belief about the reliability. Could you remind me of the second part of your question? I'm sorry, I get lost in these things. Risk. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really salient issue. There are many areas in which the fact of the matter is, in some sense, very difficult to determine or inaccessible in some way. And that's, of course, going to affect how we judge the reliability of the instrument involved. If we can't judge if the outputs line up to reality, we can't judge if it's reliable or not. But I don't think that that's a general problem. I mean, that may be a problem in the case of risk assessment and probabilistic we do get along just fine doing those things most of the time. And even if there is some kind of general concern about that, it seems to me LLM could do this activity with what we would normally think of as assertions, not just with these risk calculations. Does that make sense? Does that explain?
Thanks. This is a great talk, both of you. This is a question for Hiranya. I have a little bit of difficulty thinking about what's going on this site as a game. I should say first, I've read a lot of papers about this site, and no one's ever talked about this, so that's really interesting. I'm thinking that it might be useful for readers for you to do a little bit of kind of situating different kinds of games in online platforms, because there are a lot of them. I mean, if you think, first of all, there are all the people like me who never play video games, so those essential features of video games that, you can sort of pick up from some of the literature would be interesting. For drivers and delivery people, the games are really much more about getting them to stay on the platform and do more work, so they're about the tiers and the bonuses and stuff. And so it's a work effort game. Yours is a chance game to a large extent, except that there's some skill involved, trying to figure out how many tokens you need to get there, right? So I just think maybe sort of a typology of games with their essential features could be really useful. And sort of how much of this game is chance and how much of it is really skill? I'm kind of curious about that.
Thank you very much for that interesting point and the question. And also, the interesting fact about the typology of games is in the interest of time and the focus of the paper, I only focused on one type of game, which is based on these digital currency tokens. But interestingly, as you mentioned, there are a lot of other games that are gamified that's going on this platform. So for example, the work identity game, which is really connected with these badges where these workers are trying to pursue on these platforms. And that badges are really different from the badges that we see in the other platforms like Uber, where the badges doesn't play that much of a role in these platforms, because the worker and the customer is matched with an algorithm. But here, the difference I'm seeing is it's an auction-based marketplace where the central work identity base of it is playing a central game on these platforms, where it's kind of very key in connecting the buyer of these services and the worker. So the badges here on the platform also plays a very central role in the gamified architecture. So, and it's really, I'm trying to really come up with the typology of the games here, but in this paper I only focus the game that's based on this token system. And that is also interesting fact that I'm seeing in this data is all these games are connected, obviously, because even the number of connects that they get for free on the platform depends on what type of a membership and the badges that they have. So it's all over connected on the architecture itself, and also connected in the way that it's being enacted in practice of this everyday work. And your question, I'm sorry, I forget the question actually, the last one.
What versus skill? What versus skill?
Yes, so the skill here is the point on the skill. As I mentioned, the skill set here obviously plays a key role in making that match, and also the chances and the skill set that mostly depend on what clients are looking for on the platform, because that's why I'm saying people are really opaque about the fact that are these clients actually making that recruitment decision based on just about the prioritizing the number of tokens that being spent and just having the batch of boosted. There's a batch for the boosting as well. So even after spending the tokens and appearing at the top of that job application set that clients see in his or her interface, there is another batch that's related to these tokens called boosting batch. And even that, so the workers are not so sure sometimes about these clients making the recruitment decisions are based on the actual skill set that they're looking for, or the expertise or the experience on the platform, or if it's these tokens or the boosting or just the appearance on the top of the list. So that I guess that totally depends on the client's perspectives. And interestingly, there are not much of clients that's expressing their ideas on the platform forum itself. But I only have spoken to 2 of the clients in my data set. But yeah, so the fact is by the architecture itself, the platform is trying to give that investment ideology about business investment about the tokens, saying that spending the tokens itself signals these clients that they are too serious and invested, so that workers actually kind of think that if they don't spend that, the clients will be thinking that they're not too serious and invested in the job. So it's a whole ambiguity for these workers in figuring whether clients are looking for the actual skill set or it's just a chance of winning. And obviously there's a chance critical role played by the possibility as well, because it's again a gamble where they're trying to make a hire as a win on the platform, trying to get a successful recruitment.
Okay, so I've got Julie and then Nir. I'm sorry, you waved at me several times. I know you want to get to it.
Thanks. This is a question for Jake. So first, just an example that might be friendly to your position before asking a question that's more critical. So on the potentially helpful example, it seems like another case where we rely on something without any human understanding the mechanism. My understanding is that some pharmaceuticals are like this, where no medical authority actually understands how they work, but they do work, and we trust the FDA process to ensure their reliability, and we let people take them. So that's one point in favor. But on the other side, though, and I'm not sure if I misunderstood, but it seemed like you wanted to draw 2 implications from your argument, one about accountability and one about the optimization strategies. And the optimization point is that we shouldn't prioritize getting the LLMs to explain their reasoning to us. But they seem to me to be in some tension, these 2 implications, because in order for a human to have accountability for the use of the LLM, it'd be very helpful if we did in fact understand what was going on inside the black box. And so for the purposes of oversight, that would inform accountability, and also for the purposes of other humans trusting the humans who tell us that they are reliable, it would also be helpful to understand the inside of the black box. So I wasn't quite sure why we needed to reach this conclusion that we shouldn't still be trying to get the LLMs to tell us their reasoning.
Oh, okay, yeah, perfect. So, yeah, the issue is not that we shouldn't be trying to investigate how LLMs work and why they give us the outputs we do. And there's a lot of really interesting stuff that I'm sure you're aware of being done in this space now. What I was recommending against is one thing that you might think is a fun backdoor to doing that is just to make the LLM more capable of responding in that way. And what I'm suggesting is that there is just a fundamental disconnect, no matter what the LLM says. Now, here's an interesting, here's something interesting. You may come to form justified chains of reasoning by reading the output of the LLM, and that's very interesting. But as the LLM has no justification at all, there is nothing for it to, there's nothing for its explanation to point back to in itself. If we could somehow solve that problem, where the LLM is legitimately talking about its own internal workings, that may be a slightly different story. But even then, it seems like you're now being told how a mechanism works rather than explain a chain of reasoning. So I think even there's a disconnect. Thank you.
So thank you both, Jake and Ryan, really cool talks. A question for each of you. Jake, I really like the thermometer LLM analogy. I just want to sort of ask you or push you about the incorporation of psychological fact about us that often we kind of like to shake off responsibility. So if you go outside, or you take your kid outside with shorts shorts when it's too cold because the thermometer was wrong. You would like it to be the thermometer's fault. LLMs are a lot more seductive as targets of shaking off responsibility than thermometers, especially with the coming sort of integration of LLMs as the operating systems of humanoid type robotics. It's just going to be a lot easier to, already is a lot easier to anthropomorphize LLMs than a thermometer. So I think you're going to get a kind of responsibility shake-off effect. And then for Hiranya, the more I talk to some startups that are starting to use LLMs as their sort of main interface, the explanations I get from them is that they're using them as a gamifying method, namely interacting with an app, even if it could give you its results with the rule-based, old-fashioned sort of algorithms just as well. It's just more engaging, and I'd like to suggest to you that LLMs are very much entering, like ChatGPT, very much entering the gamification game.
Yeah, so thanks for that question and that comment. Yeah, I mean, I think that the comment really encapsulates half of why I think it's so important to be discussing this as we start involving LLMs. We are going to want to blame LLMs, and I do want to make a distinction. I mean, there is a sense in which you blame the thermometer, and that is in some sense right. I don't know that there's time to go into it right now, but there are these kind of two distinct types of blame, or at least two you might think. One is epistemic, and one is kind of like practical. Like, I did it because of this, right? As opposed to the thermometer was wrong to tell me X or something, or unjustified. But I think that our desire to push blame off is exactly what concerns me. And you know, at the individual level, you might think that, or at the layperson level, you might think that this is kind of like a small piece of irrationality that doesn't really hurt anybody. But of course, when we get to the idea of corporate entities, groups, even political systems now making these decisions and seeking to push accountability for those decisions off on something else, it seems we've entered a realm which is maybe a little bit more dangerous. So I think that it's really, this is why I think it's so important to clarify this now, that you can't play that game, and the goal is not necessarily to convince every person who uses an LLM, but to have an eye towards enshrining that idea in some kind of policy or regulatory framework.
Thank you very much for the suggestion and question as well. So I think like obviously that is a new area that I need to look at when integrating these LLMs in the gamification platform as well. So to your question about the obviously using these gamified practices to engage more in this work. So I guess yeah. So and it is about more engagement, but also like the interesting fact I'm seeing here is the other consequences that's been produced with that engagement. It's also partly about not so being exciting to play these games, so it's creating them so much complaints and dissent and also resistance on the platform. And also the other aspect of the engagement I'm seeing is its long run on those platforms, given that they like the platforms itself appears as choiceful to like swap between the different platforms. Like even in Uber, people can have work on Uber and Lyft as well at the same time. But the difference I'm seeing on those platforms when it comes to the knowledge work is the self-investment in the organization for long run plays a key role, because like they can't literally swap between the platforms very easily, because there is a sort of that monetary and a long-term, even for the badges and things like that, a long-term investment in the work identity that is happening attached to those gamified practices on those platforms. So that's what I'm thinking as a difference between just doing work fun and exciting. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay, any final questions?
This question is for Jake. You mentioned that because the LLM is not justifiable, so the blame, the epistemic blame will rest solely on the agent. I just want to ask you like a related question. Basically, how much confidence or trust we have in LLM, whether it is related to the justifiability or explainability, whatever, about the LLM decisions or whatever they say, or it's more like the confidence not from whether it is justifiable or explainable, but from the deductively from our experience with LM, and we say, you know what, 99.9% of the time, you are good, you're good enough for me, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, great question. I think this deserves some emphasis. So I definitely don't want this account to be one in which I don't want to be seen as questioning or saying that we're unjustified in believing things on the basis of LLMs. We are absolutely justified, and very much in cases like you described, where you have like very good evidence that this thing has been right before, you've interacted with it before, it's worked out for you before. That is a kind of, those are beliefs about reliability, right? And that's perfectly fine from an epistemic standpoint. We gain beliefs like that all the time. They seem perfectly good beliefs, and that's exactly what justifies us in the case of LLMs. I think what concerns me about recent conversations that I've heard, both from lay people and from professionals, about this topic is that the illusion of personhood is so convincing even now, when it's not very good, that we would rather give up on the idea that something needs beliefs to make assertions, then give up on the idea that LLMs don't have beliefs. I think that's a dangerous road to go down, and I think we really need to be careful about how we ascribe these kind of traditionally mental properties to these systems, because it can lead us astray on where we place accountability, where we place resources, and et cetera. So yeah, it's a great question. Thanks for emphasizing that.
All right, so thank you very much, and please join me in thank you.